response that we've had from closing opposition to our extension is asking the question, why would the US let them? The US will just block them, and Israel will just block them on the United Nations. A number of responses to that, which are very easy to make. First one is that the US benefits all around the world from international law, which is a rules-based system. And so even if they don't like what Palestine is doing, they still have an incentive to operate under the rules because the rules benefit them in every other conflict. When they're trying to tell Russia not to go into Georgia, when they're trying to tell Thailand not to go into Cambodia, they need to benefit, they do benefit from the rules. So they're not going to shirk the rules when it comes to this. But secondly, not everything that you get by being a state that's a member of the UN is something that the US can block. You get membership to the World Trade Organization. You get trade. You get the ability to enforce your borders. You get the ability to ask for funding from the IMF. That's why Iran is a member of the United Nations and still trucking along fairly well, still growing every year, even though Israel and the US try to block everything that Iran does. They get other things by being a state. They can still negotiate with other countries. We think that statehood is a good thing, even if the US blocks it. We don't think that the US will block it. So let's first of all ask, what does Palestine get? Because according to opening opposition, once you have a state, your rights and agreements are frozen in time. You can no longer ask for any more, and that's why Robin was really stressed that once we'd give them a state, all the people that wanted more than a state would just shut up and they wouldn't be able to get any more. Those people would be really, really upset. We think that states are better at negotiating the things that they want than non-state actors. And we think that non-state actors a lot of the time resort to firing weapons to Tel Aviv as opposed to negotiating in what we now give them, access to the courts, access to the International Court of Justice. So we think that if Palestinian people feel like their borders aren't quite appropriate, it's better that they're a state who can go to the ICJ and sue Israel there than it is that they fire rockets into Israel. We think that they can get further that way. No thanks. You're not less able to negotiate once you're a state. You get the ability to be a state, you get ICJ membership, you get functional trade and commerce, you get better borders. But we heard a few responses to this from closing. No thanks, no problem. The first one that we heard was, you get no security because the US won't protect them. As I've already said in my introduction, the US touts the United Nations for giving sovereignty to countries because it's in the US's best interest. That's why the United States screamed at Russia when they invaded Georgia and said Georgia is a sovereign state. The United Nations says that you cannot invade. That's why the United States screamed at Thailand a few years ago when they invaded Cambodia, and the United States said Cambodia is a sovereign state, you cannot invade there. Because the United States cares generally about international law and benefits from it, they're not going to step in here and refuse to support Palestine's version of international law. Then they said the second thing, that nobody will care about borders. No thanks. And we had the quote from closing, Israel ignores UN declarations. No, they don't. They simply don't ignore UN declarations. Israel left Egypt after the Six-Day War because the UN told them to, and they did it that day. Israel left Lebanon in 2006 because the United Nations told them to, and they left that day. It is simply not true that Israel ignores what the United Nations tells them to do. Closing.
So the reason they don't have to listen to UN negotiations is because America blocks any of the ones they don't like. And America will listen to the UN so long as it's in their interest, but when it breaks down as it did in Iraq, they'll simply ignore it, as has history has shown.
I don't even need to say anything more to that, because all of my speech just now has illustrated that the US benefits from not allowing Russia to invade other countries that are sovereign, not allowing China to invade other countries that are sovereign. That's why the US isn't going to turn around and embarrass itself by allowing people to invade a sovereign Palestine. No thanks. The UN is a rules-based system, and it gives a number of things to Palestine. But the second thing that Richard gave you that they had no response to was that you get trade, you get WTO membership, you get IMF membership, you get access to the World Bank, the Gaza blockade will be illegal. You get all of these benefits, all of which are things that the United States cannot block. And a number of times that people go to the ICJ, a good example being Iran, the people that succeed in the ICJ aren't backed by America because America cannot block sovereign states from going to the International Court of Justice. No thanks. The final response that we had there from them was that this isn't all of a sudden a win. We're just magicking up apparently a beneficial state for Palestine. We're not. We just think they're going to be on the upward trend as opposed to declining at the moment and getting into worse and worse situations. No thanks. Second question is Palestinians getting what they want, and this is what the opening half talked about. They want more than statehood, and we say absolutely yes, and I've already canvassed a lot of this in my introduction. States are better at negotiating for things that they want than non-state actors. They can take things to court, exactly what was accepted by the opposition whip. When he said Israel's just going to take Palestine to court, we think the vice versa can happen, and that judicial decision will be handed down. We think that's a beneficial thing. That's why Kosovo and Yugoslavia have been better able to negotiate their disputes once both of them are states. That's why Scandinavian continental shelf cases came to the floor once those countries got statehood under a newly reformed United Nations. That's why Malaysia started to ask for for some of what it wanted from the Philippines and from Singapore once it got statehood, because states are better able to negotiate for their borders. Opening.
Every time Israel is pressured internationally, like in the Goldstone report or the ICJ report with a case condemning the war, they have turned right. They have increased settlement building, they have increased violence against the Palestinians. Why would this be any different?
We do not think that people will increase violence against the Palestinians, and if they do, that will be illegal at international law. We think that Palestine deserves to be protected at international law. Third thing to talk about, no thanks, is reform in Palestine. The first point that we had in response from the opposition whip was to say, Hamas want to wipe Israel off the map. That's simply not true anymore. Hamas have not expressed that for a number of years, and that's why they've just agreed to a Cairo Accord, which in its agreement accepts that they believe that Israel is a state which can sign a ceasefire, because they wouldn't sign a ceasefire with someone that they didn't believe was a legitimate state. That's why also in 2005 they agreed with Fatah in the coalition which lasted for a year before it went pear-shaped because they didn't have statehood and nothing came of it. They agreed with Fatah that they would accept the two-state solution because they believed that that would be most likely to get Palestinians the right of return. It's simply not true that Hamas and Fatah won't meet. And then they said that Fatah won't want this. We actually think that Fatah will be empowered in their rhetoric and in what they want if they can have statehood, if they can have an international community which backs Palestine. We think that Fatah will take it. That's exactly what happened in 2006. We had a positive coalition for a year. And finally, I'm going to talk about reforming Israel, stuff that they haven't responded to at all. In Israel, there are a number of liberal ideologies and an incredible number of liberals. We think that that's a beneficial thing. You discredit the right wing and you give a new revolutionary narrative when you literally say at international law what Netanyahu has been saying is no longer recognised by the rest of the world. You give those liberals some say, and we think that that's a beneficial thing. Secondly, you allow Israel to take Hamas to the International Court of Justice if they fire rockets in. We think that rocket firing will stop, and we think that's a beneficial thing. And then the final thing they said here was Israel's just going to consistently sue Palestine. If the problem they have is that Israel will sue, therefore recognise Palestine at international law, we think that that's a beneficial thing. States are better at negotiating when they are states than when they are non-state actors. We want Palestine to have a state so that Palestine can operate in international law. We don't think the United States can block most of the benefits. We stand in proposition.